It's wonderful to be here today. This is the sixth. Oh, I need control of the buttons. There we go. This is our sixth show, so thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And this one has received a lot of attention because we have a special project and some really special guests today. So what we're doing with Building Conversations is every week it gives me an opportunity to talk to folks in the Passivhaus community right across Canada about some of the projects they're engaged in and some of the challenges and the opportunities that Passivhaus building offers to them. And as I said today, this is a special topic, so I won't spend any more time. We'll get moving on it. So without further ado, let me turn my camera off and I will turn the presentation on and we'll get moving. So I'm Chris Ballard. I'm the CEO of Passivhaus Canada, as Deb mentioned early on. I have been the CEO for the past 6 months, so I'm still in that steep learning curve when it comes to Passivhaus construction. But I've held a bunch of other jobs throughout my career, from town councillor, journalist, consumer advocate. And you know, I get asked this question: why are you working with Passivhaus Canada? And tell us a little bit about Passivhaus building standards. I can say that all of the experience I've had in my life around quality building and addressing environmental concerns and the relationship between elected officials, government decision makers, and municipal buildings, provincial buildings, has made me come to the conclusion that Passivhaus building and retrofit standard address many of the housing and environmental issues we face today. And they are numerous. I don't have to tell you that. So welcome, Melissa, Scott, and Stuart. Melissa Higgs is passionate about creating innovative public buildings where communities come together. You'll see that example today with the Clayton Community Center. She's a firm believer in the power of architecture and design to be a catalyst for positive change in the world. We have Scott Groves, who is currently the Director of Strategic and Capital Projects for the City of Coquitlam. He has a background as a professional engineer, and he believes that Clayton Community Center best achieved his goal of better buildings, making better communities, because we are better together. And I can say that although Scott is with the City of Coquitlam, he was formerly manager of civic facilities for the City of Surrey during the time of conception and building of Clayton Community Center. And last but certainly not least, Stuart Hood is our engineer. He's the regional director for Integral Group. And he has extensive experience in the design of Passivhaus buildings for a wide variety of forms, residential, fire halls, community centers. And Stuart is also known as a leader in the movement to decarbonize buildings. That will be a separate topic for one of our next building conversations in the weeks ahead. So thank you all three. What I'm going to do is I will invite the three of you to turn later on, shortly. Later on, we'll get you to turn your screens on, your videos on, and we'll begin a conversation. But before we get there, what I want to do is talk about Passivhaus standards for just a couple of minutes. And for those of you who have tuned into Passivhaus Canada's Building Conversations before, I like to emphasize this really important fact that our ancestry has its roots in Canada. This is the, excuse me, this is the Saskatchewan Conservation House. And it was built in Regina, Saskatchewan in 1977 by Dr. Orr and Associates. It was funded by the Saskatchewan government. It was very much in response to the OPEC oil embargo of the day, when governments were wondering how Canadians were going to survive if oil was restricted, heating oil was restricted in Canada, and the government of Saskatchewan funded Dr. Orr and his group to build this house to very high insulation and air tightness standards, still lived in today, still performing as it was designed. And it's been acknowledged by the Passivhaus Institute as one of the ancestors of today's modern passive house standards. So for all of us who are Canadian, we can take some pride in knowing that we were instrumental in the foundations of what today are Passivhaus Institute building standards. So thank you, Dr. Orr and your co-workers and the government of Saskatchewan for showing leadership in those days. So our slogan at Passivhaus Canada is build better, feel better. And I want to take 1 second to just again emphasize what that means. So Passivhaus standards are obviously very important, but what are they? And I want to run through these very quickly. Passivhaus means super insulated building envelope, so super insulated walls. It means high quality windows with solar orientation so that in the cold months you use the sun to warm your building, and in the hot months there's shade from that solar rays getting into your house and heating it. It means a ventilation system with heat recovery. It means a building that is thermal bridge free, and it means a building that is airtight. And you feel better in one of these buildings, whether you're living in it, working in it, or playing in it, because there is year-round stable indoor air quality and temperature. You have a quiet and comfortable, it's quiet and comfortable throughout the changing seasons. There is a substantial reduction in energy use and operating costs, and that the systems are simple to use and durable. And all of this adds up to giving you priceless peace of mind. So these are the fundamental tenets of Passivhaus Institute design. So about Passivhaus Canada, very quickly, we are a not-for-profit advocacy organization representing professionals, builders, tradespeople, public policy makers, anyone interested in building better and building to low energy standards and making better places to live, work, and play. Our mission here at Passivhaus Canada is to make the international Passivhaus standard of building performance understood, achievable, and adopted by government, industry, professionals, building suppliers, and the public right across Canada. If you believe in what we're talking about today, I encourage you to become a member, to explore our education and information on Passivhaus. We have a lot of free information there if you're just starting out about performance standards, a lot of information for the public, professionals, trades, government. Get in touch with us if you want to learn more. And now our guests. So this is where I'm inviting our guests to turn on their cameras, and we will have a conversation if we can. Hello all, about Clayton Community Center, which I'm telling you is really quite an impressive facility. Before we go too far, through funding generously provided by BC Hydro, they've allowed us to produce a number of very short videos. The three of you have seen all of these videos, but I suspect most people on today's show have not seen any of these videos. So we picked one of the videos that I'd like to play now, and then we'll begin our conversation. So Scott, Melissa, Stewart, we'll all turn off our videos for a second, and I will go to the next screen and launch that video, and then we'll be back. I wanted to show your faces and introduce you to the crowd. So here we go. HCMA, Architecture and Design, that's the firm that Melissa is a principal of, and it has been shortlisted for the World Architecture Festival's Civic Future Projects category. So the video would have told you a lot more, but we are We're experiencing technical difficulties right now. But what I'd like to be able to do is start with start with Scott. And Scott, I want to know if you can elaborate about why the City of Surrey decided on Passivhaus. Is this something that started with staff? Did this start with council? How did this idea of moving to Passivhaus standard come about?
It started with me.
Oh, okay. Then I've got the right guy on the line.
Yeah, I had been looking for better solutions for this city. I had, a lot of experience with different LEED projects and other aspects of sustainability, but wasn't seeing the results that I wanted to see. Buildings were well built, but sometimes operations became the issue and weren't actually run the way that they were designed
Right.
because of public reaction. So I was looking for a few years for another solution and started doing a lot of research on Passivhaus. And yeah, so I decided to do it, and with the support of my boss and a very trusting city council who didn't really know what I was doing, but trusted me, we moved forward.
That's very good. That level of trust is really necessary there. And I know as a former town councillor myself how disappointing it is to spend to build a building that you thought was going to be very energy efficient, very comfortable, only to find out after it's constructed that it's really not performing to where you had hoped it was going to perform. So a question I would have for Melissa then, because she came on board as the architect. And how difficult, Melissa, what were the opportunities that you found in working with the City of Surrey and designing a building to Passivhaus standards? What were, I hate to say what were the challenges, but really, so what were the opportunities for you in moving forward?
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of time. There's so many stories to tell. It was a bit of a roller coaster, and I've told the story before about Scott calling me. So we had worked on a previous project together, and for this project, I remember getting a call from Scott where he said, hey, I'm thinking maybe we should try and make this building Passivhaus. What do you think? And I thought, in my inside voice, I was like, I'm a bit afraid. I'm not sure what that means. And I feel like maybe it's going to constrain the architectural excellence component. And I've never done it before. And it's so there's a bunch of fear, I would say. The experience was amazing. I think we had a fantastic client, which makes all the difference. We had a really great team. I think some of the really big early surprises, I would say, would be, in your first slide where you talked about super insulating the building. So we started off with, from a performance perspective, super insulating the building, and then our kind of early PHPP modeling showed us surprisingly that because we have such a huge occupant load, and the building starts, it opens at 6 in the morning and it may run till 10 or 11 at night, it's completely different than a residential usage. So the heat generated just purely by occupants was such that we had a really huge cooling problem and almost no heating issue at all. So there's a whole series of stories like that where we kind of made initial assumptions, and being kind of the first, there wasn't a lot. We can now share this story, and people may start from designing similar facilities can start knowing that might be their issue and think about it differently. Right. That's kind of one early story. I mean, I probably have lots of questions, but I think the idea that we had to strip insulation out of the building was big. And then Stuart will probably talk a little bit about natural ventilation, which ended up being a huge part of how we addressed that cooling issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots more I could talk about there.
And this must have felt a bit intimidating right off the bat for you, because this is this building is the first in North America.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me for a minute or so, what did that mean? I could hear the inside voice saying, have we bitten off more than we can chew? Is Passivhaus appropriate for it? What were some of those initial?
All of those things. And I think I would say HCMA likes to be, like, we are a firm that is, we're trying to be innovative where innovation makes sense for our clients and our projects. So I think that I am really fortunate to be at a firm, and again, to be working with a client where there's really a feeling like we're in this together. And I think between Scott and I and the rest of the design team, it was always like, this is the aspiration and this is the target, but we all recognized we were kind of charting new territory with Passivhaus. So the learnings and the you know, there were some failings where we had to go back to the drawing board and redo it. We were in that together. So I think it felt definitely scary. It was a bit of there's like a narrative story arc where there are moments where you're kind of tearing your hair out thinking, well, what if we can't do this? What if this doesn't work? But we kind of got through all of those, and it was, you know, probably one of the most satisfying processes I've ever been in as an architect. And I've said a bunch of times, I've kind of drank the Kool-Aid, so I would advocate certainly for Passivhaus for a whole bunch of reasons.
Very good. It's funny how fast that happens when people dip their toes into the Passivhaus waters, that they end up becoming very passionate about the standards. But what I wanted to do right now is just keep that idea about some of the key learnings, you know, in your mind. And I want to bring Stuart in and ask him about Stuart, you know, what you found were the greatest challenges, just what you found different about working. I know you've done a lot of Passivhaus work. But what was challenging about this building? What do you find is challenging in general about Passivhaus, and how do you get past that?
Yeah, I think and Melissa intimated you know, the cooling and the gas cooling. You know, passive houses, usually people are talking about how do we, you know, address the heating issue. So addressing the cooling issue became the concern. And then we found that it was consuming a lot of energy just because of, you know, how many people were in there. They were exercising in the gym, on treadmills. And so we went to a natural ventilation system. And so, you know, that becomes challenging, and that many buildings get sealed up and just mechanically cooled to deal with it. And so in a building of this size with probably, you know, like 100 windows, you know, who's going to open and close all those windows when there's maybe sort of, you know, 10 staff working in the place, right? Who's going to go around all day? So we opted for a motorized window solution so that we could actually open the windows at night when it's cool at night and flush the heat out of the building and pre-cool the building for the day before. And so, you know, those motorized window actuators, you know, in the past have a bit of a history of sort of you know, unreliability, and how do you get to them to maintain them and access them. And so, you know, the maintenance department, you know, rightly so, is skeptical about products like this. And so we have to sort of look for new products that have got a better track record. And I think that was one of the key things, was working with the City of Surrey's maintenance department to convince them that things, you know, can be better and things can be different to the way they were in the past, and introducing them to new products. But often these products are, you know, European design products, which means that they have concerns about spare parts. Right. But in the end, you know, through, you know, lots of meetings and show and tell, you know, we get them to realize that these products are actually superior and better, and that we, you know, think through all of the challenges that they might have. But already, I think through the commissioning process, it's, you know, the commissioning guys are feeding back about just how great it feels in this building to be, you know, in a naturally ventilated building. And in this time of, you know, the global pandemic, everybody's very happy, I'm sure, to be having operable windows and not be in a sealed box anymore. So it's sort of interesting, you know. I was on a Passivhaus happy hour a few weeks ago, and Wolfgang Feist, the founder of the Passivhaus movement, was on there, you know, and they were talking about 10 reasons why the global coronavirus pandemic will lead to a pandemic of Passivhaus, and the health and hygiene aspect of Passivhaus was one of the key things that
it's certainly you know, Passivhaus, we have sort of refocused in North America, well, globally, on low energy. But the interesting thing about Passivhaus is it was at first a, you know, a health standard, designed to a health standard and a comfort standard and a resiliency standard and a good quality, just a good quality construction standard. And lo and behold, if you do all of those things, you also get a very low energy consumption building. So you know what?
You get a much better response from people when you talk about health and comfort than you do when you talk about energy, and it is a standard, as you say. So that's absolutely the thing. And I would say one of the great things about it being a public community center building, is that people can access it and they can go and see it and feel it for themselves. And I think that's one of the biggest things about Passivhaus is you have to feel it to understand what it is. And so, you know, with this building, anybody's going to be able to access it and go to it. Whereas often they're in residential buildings, and after the construction period, they're very difficult to access. So it's
the homeowner isn't as excited about having home tours and having hundreds of people come through their house. So let me pick up with Melissa for a second, then, if I might. Melissa, the challenge of this building is that it's big. And I want to run this past Scott as well, but it's also multi-purpose, you know. And it's what I'm seeing is that it's just not a building with sort of 3 separate compartments. That over here's the library, over here's the recreation, over here's, you know, you're trying to do everything together, sort of, you know, in one building. What sort of challenge does that present for an architect?
I'm going to say challenge and opportunity here, but it really meant for us that we had, you know, 4 different client groups. So library in particular, their funding stream is different. They're reporting to a board of directors. They don't use union staff. Their hours of operation might be different. You know, and then the arts and culture, parks and rec, they're just operating under different parameters, and to some extent may have different philosophies. So I think what was really critical, and I think Passivhaus in a way really helped us with that, is at the very beginning we had to come together and collectively determine what the vision for the building was, and integrating it and instead of having it as siloed uses operating in one community center was really critical. So and I think just how Stuart kind of mentioned the idea that it's easy to sell people on comfort over energy. I think the kind of big selling feature for our client team was saying, what's best for the community? So when the community first comes into this building, they don't really understand or probably care too much who works for who and who's union and who's not union. They just want to come into a building and understand what programming is available to them at what time of the day, what courses they can sign up for, and activities they can take. And, you know, one reception desk and a completely open way of fluidly moving through spaces is going to be the best way to serve the community. So you know, I won't get into it, but there's a lot of quite reasonable operational and logistical issues there. But I think, again, Passivhaus for me was part of that solution, because we were all kind of collectively rallied around this vision of achieving Passivhaus. And I guess maybe going back to your earlier question about the differences architecturally, a Passivhaus required us to engage in really detailed conversations with all of the client team really early on, like at the schematic design level, around how exactly they planned to program the building, like specifically like what appliances will you plug in, what kind of activities will you offer in your activity schedule. And that's, you know, 4 years out in some cases for these kinds of buildings, right? So they're hard questions for the client. So there really needed to be this high level of integration at the client team, which was then reflected, I think, in how the building evolved from a design perspective. So I'm sure Scott can add some perspective on that. But
and I wanted to follow up with Scott on that, because I can imagine the variety of uses. And Scott, I heard even an inventory of how many kettles might be plugged in, the types of exercise equipment, and the energy usage of that equipment. Why is that so important, Scott, to know all of that energy load?
Well, the PHPP takes into account every electrical load, because electricity turns to heat, right? So basically, you have to calculate it all. So there's restrictions on it. And what happened was we realized the fitness center was going to be a big problem for us with the amount of load that each of the electrified units take. And we started using some non-electric equipment in some of our existing facilities just to test and make sure that it would work for us. So it actually benefited not just this building, but other fitness centers with the use of these new products that are not using electricity.
Right. So, and the benefit of a non-electrical piece of exercise equipment means, I guess it cuts down on energy usage, but fewer parts to break, that sort of thing, is it?
Well, yeah, and we couldn't go to all, you know, non-electric treadmills, for instance. Treadmills were one of the biggest users, and we had to think about all of our clients, all of our community. So if a senior comes in to use a treadmill, getting a non-electric one started actually takes a little bit more energy. So we have to provide both. And I think that, it was a real good learning experience for our recreation team to think about these kind of things that otherwise they would have just kept using the equipment that they thought was best, but maybe isn't best for every person in the community.
Yeah. So you talked earlier on, and you answered my first question that you weren't satisfied with the performance of buildings that had been built, and Passivhaus seemed like it might be the way to go. And you also mentioned that you moved forward with the support of our bosses and support of council. What was the reaction when you went to the boss, when you went to council and started talking to elected officials about really a new way to build? Now, the caveat is that in British Columbia, that is the ancestral home for all of Canada. The first Passivhaus built in Whistler, and the BC government and a variety of municipalities really adopting aggressive building codes and building standards. So Passivhaus is a lot more well known in BC than it is in other provinces. So I hope you had that on your side. But I bet there was a bit of trepidation on your part as you moved this idea forward.
Yeah, actually, my manager is the general manager of planning and development, and so he had his only experience with Passivhaus was negative when someone wanted to build one as a residential, but tried to do it without actually engaging the proper professionals and people who understood what they were doing. So, and then also just training the people in the permits department on what we were trying to achieve, because things were different, right. And maybe didn't meet what they thought it should. So yeah, it was a little bit of a conversation that I had to have with him, and thankfully I had already spent 7 years building trust with them and delivered some pretty cool projects in the city of Surrey. So I had a little bit of extra, credit. A
bit of credit to spend, and sitting on the other side of the table, we look to people like you to who we could trust, and even if we didn't understand it as a counselor, we would know that that staff understood it. So that's a good thing. But it sounds like it was a pretty big job on your part, as Melissa has talked about, coordinating with all the potential user groups, all of the things that might go on in this building. How did you do that?
Well, we actually had to have change management workshops at the beginning because people weren't ready to engage in the way that I envisioned them engaging, and HCMA was a huge partner in that. I couldn't have done it without them. They had a different team within their company that's not even architecture that helped us have those kind of workshops and get people to start thinking about, like Melissa said, community first and not how we've always done things, and maybe integrating their programming. Like we talked throughout the design about how the different departments can actually create program in this building together. Can the library write a cookbook? Can the arts and culture group using that cookbook train people how to cook in our community kitchen, and then serve it to the community at the long tables that are involved in the building. So and then also a community garden outside. So trying to think with parks, arts, library, recreation, how can we do things for the community that are beyond what we've done before and better together.
Yeah, better, which is your philosophy of how you operate, and we raised that early on. It's quite interesting to see this new approach to building, the Passivhaus approach to building, being one that calls for an integrated approach on the city's part anyway, about how these organizations or departments all work together, are going to work together in this building. That's got to be a good thing.
One of the things too that when you talk about integration, one of the important pieces for me was the integration of the designers and the contractors early too. It wasn't just our internal staff, but this change management was throughout. One of the things that I always question with other types of sustainability programs was the modeling of the energy. You know, you get credits for it, but you don't do it until you're finished your design because it's so difficult to do the modeling. But with PHPP, we used it from the very beginning to make decisions with,
right.
and it was easy to do iterations with. And that was a really big benefit. I actually think that, you know, any type of modeling should have that kind of opportunity where you can iterate it quickly and make decisions with it rather than just make a judgment call and then model it at the end.
And hope for the best.
Yeah, and hope for the best. Well, and then, you know, the comfort piece, you're talking about the comfort piece. Comfort's the reason that LEED buildings fail.
Yeah.
They're designed to work really well with energy. But, you know, we compartmentalize them. We don't make them airtight. We have drafts because of the amount of mechanical equipment pushing air around. People are uncomfortable because they've got solar heat on one side and cold air on the other side moving past them. And then they complain. And then operators, mechanical maintenance guys, change the settings on everything to try and address it. The nice thing about Passivhaus is that all your surfaces all around you would be the same temperature. The flow of air is a lot less drafty. The solar gain is not on you unless you want it to be. And you know, in the wintertime, maybe it's very enjoyable to have that sun shining on you, but not in the summer. So the shade, the shade structures are really important. And,
good.
Yeah, no, it's been a fantastic project.
And I wanted to pick up with Stuart on this concept, and I don't want to get too in depth, Stuart, but I just wanted to talk about the need for everyone. We've heard about the need for the departments within the city to come together and to plan collaboratively. You know, Scott mentioned the need for the design, the contractors, the builders, the tradespeople to all come together early on, rather than throughout the project. Oftentimes we know from different styles of building too late. But just briefly, tell me about this process of working together.
I think, you know, the working together, I go back to the natural ventilation example, right? You know, people think, okay, natural ventilation means, you know, just provide some operable windows. But, you know, in a building of this size, you know, how big do the operable windows need to be? Where do they need to be, you know, in the building? How do you get the air both into the building and out of the building? And so I think that was a key process through some, and we did some extra modeling on top of the PHPP stuff to model the natural ventilation systems, and going backwards and forwards, working together with HCMA to sort of identify, okay, how big are the windows? How far do they have to open? There's often restrictions about, you know, people falling out of windows if they're too wide open. And so things like this, you have to think about the height of those windows, where they are. And there's a really cool design in this project with this central atrium space that has these clear story vents in them to allow the hot air to rise out and induce the cool air in at the lower levels. And so I think that integration of the operable window systems is one of the greatest examples on this project of that sort of collaborative working.
Right. And I think there's a whole building conversations show in the future about Passivhaus and that the need for architects, engineers, client to work closely together throughout the whole process. Unlike some others where it may be designed and then passed off to engineering and then passed off to builders to actually implement. So to me, this is a radical way of doing things, but one that gets you the results you need.
Yeah, and I think one of the, the most misunderstood things about Passivhaus is, because a lot of conversations around the building should be airtight, but that's a sort of a winter or midsummer condition, right? You want to seal it up when you want to seal it up, it's properly sealed. But really, for 80% of the year, you want to let that thing, open with the windows and breathe, right? And the air tightness is to deal with the middle of winter condition and the middle of summer condition.
Yeah, I imagine sitting here in my community north of Toronto with the snow still coming down yesterday, that air tightness and warmth were certainly top of mind. And it always fascinates me about Passivhaus, especially residential, when I had a building scientist tell me that humans are really walking and talking 100-watt incandescent light bulbs in terms of the amount of heat we give off, and how that's that's the primary heat source, even in colder climates right across Canada. And so it's interesting to hear you say and Melissa say one of the first things that you came across was these buildings were going to overheat because they had so many people in them, so many humans giving off energy. And I especially would imagine with the gym, that would have presented extra problems with people exercising and working up some extra heat. So it really is a unique style, and the window openings, the automatic window opening actuators sound kind of a fascinating way to get around it. So I wanted to go back to Melissa for a second, if I may, and I'm sorry you guys are all popping in and off of the screens, but I think it's an internet bandwidth problem we have. We were hoping to have all of us together, but that mucks up our audio. So hi,
Chris,
Melissa.
Wondering if I can interrupt just for a second, give you a little 5-minute warning, because we've got a lot of questions coming in here too. So given that opportunity.
Oh, good. Okay, well that's excellent that we have a lot of good questions. And I guess Melissa, I wanted to say, how important was the using that modeling software to the design of this building?
It was absolutely critical, and I think architecturally so powerful. I think if you asked most architects, the ability to actually test your design thinking in real time based on real information, it's heartbreaking sometimes when you've worked really hard and you've made a bunch of assumptions and you put the new information in and the new model and it doesn't meet the outcome that you're hoping for. But absolutely just an incredible experience and such a powerful tool. And I think that I know we only have a minute, but I think with the related thing for me that I wanted to share, maybe with the design focused folks listening, what I loved about Passivhaus was that it's performance based, so it's not prescriptive, and so that fear that the design itself is going to be dictated and constrained in some way, I think the PHPP modeling allows you to have test the design ideas that make sense for the project in real time and know whether you're having the impact. So it's very powerful to have the knowledge to say, yes, this design that we've come up with the windows in this orientation, it's actually delivering all the experiential qualities that we're trying to get to architecturally and the operational requirements for the client, but it's also meeting this incredibly stringent Passivhaus target. Is essential and a wonderful tool. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that that plug, because I know we have a lot of people who are new to Passivhaus online, wanting to learn some more. And again, I'll say that there's lots of information on our website. This conversation is being taped, for example, and we'll have it on our YouTube channel along with all of the other conversations we've had. But maybe the best thing to do right now, Deb, is to ask our moderator to start going through some of the questions, and our panelists can answer. Deb.
Sure, yeah. So this question actually isn't addressed to anyone in particular, so we will leave that to who would like to address it. Any experience or thoughts with using electrochromic tinted glass, smart glass, to control building loads? Lighter tint in heating seasons can decrease heating load, and darker tint in cooling seasons can decrease cooling load.
Maybe Scott, you or Stuart? Okay, Stuart's first one up.
Yeah, we are using it actually in another project that HCMA and ourselves are working on together. It's Fire Hall. It's Fire Hall 17 in Vancouver. It's under construction. It's sort of midpoint of construction right now, and we are using it's sage glass that's going in that one. It's so yeah, it's electrochromatic glass, and it does exactly that. It's like a retractable solar shade, if you like, but just by tinting the glass, and we're using it. There was a sort of a zero lot line issue there, where having shades projecting out onto the street, I think would have been a problem, and so that was the solution that we landed on. Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Great.
Deb, next question.
Yeah, so this one is for Scott and Melissa. Both of you have a lot of experience in both recreation centers and the use of wood in them. Are you aware of any anecdotal or clinical health research which influenced your design considerations and the use of wood?
That's a good question. I think we're huge fans of using wood. I'm sure there is data. I couldn't reference specifically research or reports clinically. I don't know, Scott, if you have. You know, the city had a wood first policy, and we were very, very happy, as I said, because we're big fans of introducing wood when we can into civic buildings.
Yeah, I don't know about studies either, but I do know that, you know, it's a feel thing. People feel better in a wood building. Yeah, you just can't really define that totally, but it definitely makes you feel better. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, actually, a challenge that I gave to Melissa at the beginning when she asked or said that I asked if you do Passivhaus. My challenge was actually, can you do Passivhaus and make it beautiful? You know, HCMA did a great job on that. But that wood in that building is a big part of that. The problem for councils is that, you know, they don't want the public to come and say, what an ugly building. So we need to do both.
Good.
Okay. So here's a question that's addressed to no one in particular. What was the difference in building costs and energy savings over the life of project analysis?
I can jump in on costs, and Scott might want to add as well. We get that question quite a bit. It's very, very difficult to come up with a cost premium. I think we might have said 10 to 15%, but it's very hard to track because I think that there was a lot of, quite reasonably, I think, concern from trades and from the general contractor around what it actually might mean to go through Passivhaus, just because, again, it's a complete unknown, especially for a building like this. So I think that in probably almost every trade contract, there's a bit of padding, I think, quite reasonably, because the market, it's new for the market. I would think that there was no real reason for there to be attributable cost premiums other than, say, the triple glazed windows, maybe some of the specific mechanical pieces, although I think overall the amount of mechanical pieces was smaller. So, you know, the operable windows would have been a premium, but I think you're saving in other areas. So there's things you can point to, like the fact that you have to insulate underneath the foundation and the footings. That's a cost premium. But I think above that, there was a bit of padding for this project. And Scott, you know, you're kind of nodding, maybe the 10 to 15%, but it's very hard to track that specifically.
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, one of the issues for us, I think, was that we were pioneers. And also, it was when we put this project out for procurement, it was a very, very busy industry. And so, you know, if you're a contractor and you can bid on a high-rise tower that you've done a dozen of, and you have to bid on something else that you don't understand, you're going to put a higher risk premium on. So I think we lost on that. I think we paid more on the risk.
Yeah. Stuart, you wanted to add something in?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, Scott mentioned that we're, you know, pioneering, and absolutely, you know, it is, you know, for the market's going through a transformation. You know, when we started this project, there was only one product, you know, for heat recovery ventilators on the marketplace. You know, today there's 3 products on the market that, you know, are all equal, and so now there's competition, and when there's not competition, then the prices are higher. And so we've seen that transformation, you know, over the space of from when that project was tendered to where we are tendering projects today, and we're seeing prices come down dramatically on those items.
And as more and more of those items are being designed and manufactured in Canada, that helps with pricing too. So good. Yeah. Next question.
Yeah, and the rest of these are pretty well addressed to anyone who'd like to answer. How was air leakage dealt with while providing natural ventilation through motorized windows?
Melissa, Stuart.
I'm happy to take it. You know, the windows are all Passivhaus certified windows, and so, you know, that with the motorized actuators, they're just opening and closing the window. You could have somebody manually doing that same task. It's just because of the amount of them and the location of them that we needed to motorize them. But, you know, the motors and the windows are specified as a package, And so the window manufacturer is also providing the motors, and so that's integrated to make sure that the motors are, you know, correctly sort of selected to compress the seals, and, you know, have the right torque to close the windows. So I think that's one of the key factors there, is this integration of that package. Sometimes you might decide to split that out and have the mechanical controls contractor, if you like, provide the motor. And then there's this question of, well, how does he know exactly sort of which motor he needs to deal with that, with the torque settings for the window.
Right. Melissa, you had a comment?
I think Stuart answered it mostly, but I was going to add just a small piece around air tightness, particular to the community center, was around the front entry. That was a really big challenge for the team, because again, the usage rate is so high that a regular vestibule, because one door opens and then the next door is open, there's this constant airflow through that. And a traditional vestibule just wouldn't work. It would have had to be something like 50 feet between the doors. So we ended up going with an airtight revolving door, which was a really new thing for us. We see that very rarely, especially in a community center context. See them at airports. But anyway, that was just a throw out there for anybody in the audience who comes across a similar challenge around air tightness in a building of this type. But I think Stuart answered the question effectively on the window system.
Very good. Okay, Deb, next question.
Yep, sure. How well will Passivhaus cooling work in the summer, especially on those extra hot days? Does the building begin to overheat in the afternoon?
Well, so I mentioned that, you know, that natural ventilation is a sort of a mid-season solution. You know, we did prove that it could work right through the year, but you know, as we know, climate changes, we're seeing more and more, you know, hotter days. We're also seeing forest fire season, where we have, you know, a couple of weeks of smoke, where operable windows are not really the answer. So we do have a cooling system in place. You know, for the most part, it's a radiant ceiling heating and cooling system. And so there's radiant panels that are integrated with the wood structure, and they provide both heating and cooling depending on the season. And so, you know, we can seal up the building in the middle of summer and fully cool it. So, you know, it's like I said, we call it a hybrid system.
Very good. I had a question for Scott. Scott, you know, people who are building to Passivhaus standards talk about the airtight test, the pressurization test. How are you feeling when the first pressurization test was done, or about to launch? How worried were you, or not?
I wasn't worried, but Ellis Dawn, the contractor, was, and because of that, they actually did an amazing job of coordination with the trades, because they were worried about that from the design period when we were all working together. And yeah, it was fantastic. Our first test was early before closing everything in, and we were 10 times better than the target at that point, which was a surprise to everyone. We were hoping to be close, and you know, and then go and seal up the problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was fantastic. And through last winter during construction, one of the biggest comments we were hearing from the contractors is, "Wow, this building's so comfortable." And I think we paid Ellis Dawn way too much for temporary heating, because they didn't actually do much. They had one propane heater to heat the entire, you know, entire humongous building, and normally they would have had dozens of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And quiet. It was the quietest job site I've ever been on. For that reason, generators.
You didn't have the and I've heard the same thing from tradespeople working in buildings. You know, once the windows are in, they're in working on big buildings in t-shirts, and you know,
I actually made that mistake of showing up on a snowy day with my winter jacket on, and then, you know, having to take it all off on the job site because it was so comfortable.
Yeah. Did you have a comment on the question, Melissa, or elaboration on what Scott was saying? We were talking about pressure testing and what a big day that is, and how things are going. Oh, maybe not. Maybe we've lost your.
This is on mute there. This is on mute there.
Okay. Yeah. Melissa, I think you're on mute. Nope, you're not on mute.
I think I would just maybe I think I would just maybe
okay.
to start point about one heater used in the during construction. That'll be the first and last time any fossil fuel is going to be used to heat this building. It's there is no natural gas connection to it. Everything's heated by a heat pump system, and it doesn't need much of a heat pump system. You know, we have. And it needs about 25% of the installed heat pump capacity to actually heat the building. The heat pumps are designed actually based on the cooling, not the heating. So
wow.
Yeah.
So the mechanicals are there. Deb, do we have a final question?
Yeah, there's lots of questions, but we will just ask one more here. Was this a design built bid contract, or was it an IDP type contract?
Why don't we get Scott to jump in?
Neither, actually. We used a construction manager sort of agent role during the design, and Ellis Dong was on with us right from design development. And then we converted to a general contract after going out and getting the trades on board. But I think an IPD type of arrangement, maybe a little more like that, would work better for Passivhaus, getting the trades in really early, working directly with a mechanical trade, working directly with a mechanical contractor would have big benefits, or a mechanical consultant, sorry. And so, you know, I really am looking forward to doing an IPD, and I think Passivhaus could benefit from that for sure.
Yeah, good. Well, listen, Scott and Stuart and Melissa, we've run out of time. We could probably easily go on for another hour talking about all that Passivhaus building standards had to offer in this case, and the opportunities that they have presented. And we're happy to share some of the questions that we haven't been able to get to today. But I wanted to thank the three of you for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about your experience and your experiences in building this center. And I understand that the city is saying that the center should be opening June or July of this year. So it'll be a really great place. Maybe one day when I'm allowed to climb back into an airplane, love to come and visit and check the facility out. So thank you to the three of you for being on the show today, and we'll take a second more. I do apologize for not being able to play the video because they're really great videos, and it was so generous of BC Hydro to fund us to produce these three videos. Go to our Passivhaus YouTube channel. They're all there, along with past building conversation shows, and we try to make each show have its own topic. So moving along, I will say thank you to Melissa Higgs, principal from HCMA Architecture and Design, and Scott Groves, Director, Strategic and Capital Projects, now with the City of Coquitlam. Stuart Hood, Mechanical Engineer, Regional Director of Integral Group, thank you very much. I know there were a lot of other people closely involved with building this community center, and I think there'll be opportunities in past to have some of them on the show to talk about some of the other things that they're doing. I wanted to take a second and tell you that next week we have Josie Costantini from the Skiltis group talking to us. That firm is located outside of Hamilton, Ontario, and Josie's been involved in a number of different projects. And I'm told, I know that she's very skilled at speaking both architect and trades language, as she says. So we'll be fascinated to talk to her about a wide range of Passivhaus projects that she's been involved with, maybe from an Ontario perspective, and I think it'll be very interesting. So we'll leave it there. I'll say thank you to everyone who is on the show today. Thank you very much for those of you who are our viewers today. Go to our YouTube channel to view the videos we have. We appreciate your time, and we will hopefully see all of you next week. Take care.